Speech is about leadership, / articles, / LinkedIn posts. We've all seen / read / heard at least one. So I know the last thing you need now is one more speech about how to be a leader. So instead, let me tell you how not to be a leader, or rather, how to give up on being one. I think our lives are generally designed around progression. You graduate, you get a job, you climb the corporate ladder, / NGO / organization, until after years of hard work, you finally get to lead, to be at the helm. But what if it's not what you imagined? Or what if circumstances don't let you put your plan into action? Or what if circumstances are right, but somehow you still fail? Don't get me wrong, this is not me telling you that you shouldn't take on the mantle when it comes your way. But instead, that as soon as you have it, you should be thinking about the moment you will pass it on. I'm going to argue that first, this is good for you, and then that it's even better for your community. And let me start with a story from the animal kingdom. Well, it seems that scientists have discovered that during our long evolutionary history, we actually had a rival for the title of dominant species on Earth, octopuses. These guys have 3 brains capable of collaboration to make decisions, which makes them really smart. But if they're that smart, why are we here instead of them? Well, it turns out that individual smartness is nothing in the long run. Octopuses don't live very long. They die shortly after their eggs hatch, and they often eat each other. Which means that there's no transfer of knowledge across generations, as opposed to humans who not only teach their offspring, but have found ways to store knowledge in writing, in art, now with digital means. Trust me when I'm telling you that at the leadership level, knowledge transfer is more often based on octopuses than Homo sapiens. Unless we decide to change something about the way that we see our personal career progression. The solution? Thinking about stepping down as soon as you're in the top job. Which feels pretty counterintuitive because your first instinct is to stay in that position as long as possible. There's a lot of literature on this, on the issues with prolonged spells in power and the issues with legitimacy and good governance that arise from it. As far back as the Romans, we had myths like Cincinnatus, a guy who finished his term as a Roman statesman, retired to his farm, was called back twice and made dictator in dire circumstances, and after he won and presumably could have kept all that power, resigned both times to go back and be a gardener. Which feels like a pretty anticlimactic way to end a career, but the significance of the gesture is that there's more important things in life, meaning even beyond absolute power. Now, practice seems to be harder than theory because most leaders of corporations and even governments don't finish their term of their own volition, but are forced out. Look no further than current events. You can surely find some news story about someone being ousted from somewhere. But while we're used to having this conversation about grayish men and women in positions of corporate and political power, unfortunately, this is something that I've seen happen in our generation as well, in relatively unimportant youth unions as well, which makes me think that there is something wrong on a much deeper level about the way that we see our personal progression as a permanent onwards and upwards journey. Imagine this: a group of very intelligent, very ambitious people get put together. This is basically what it's like at a leadership or business club or society, or at a top university. These people have always been top of their year, subject matter experts, top of their class, but they get surrounded by people very much like them, and they can't be number one anymore. Their whole image of themselves, built around being the one, is put at risk, and that makes competitions between these people quite dirty, to the point where they turn into all rules out the window kind of matches. I've seen these people come up with great ideas, with fundraisers for a myriad of causes, with boosting environmental awareness, with youth social engagement, projects which ran well and became established in their communities, but which made their leaders become affected from what I've heard being called believing their own hype. And I know what that feels like because, as I'm about to tell you, I was there myself. Believing your own hype makes you think that your way of doing things is the only way, Remember the smart and ambitious crowd I was just telling you about? I once saw a new board take over one of these projects from its founders. They ran on a platform of change in strategy and marketing and organization, and this might not seem too strange to us, as even the biggest firms see a rebrand from time to time. Well, when the founders got wind of this, they tried to come back and stop the whole thing. Having gone through this, you might think that the community had had their vaccine against letting egos run the show. But at the next election, the reformers themselves tried to stop the next generation from changing what they had put in place. All that energy wasted. So I'm here to tell you that you shouldn't make expectations of being at the top, because those expectations will turn into a problem for you, but might be an even bigger one for those you want to lead. But what I've also learned is that keeping your own hype in check is serious business. It's like a muscle. And the more comfortable you get with power, the harder it is to let go of it. So let's try a thought experiment so I can show you why. I'll be your test subject. As you'll see, I've come to learn this the hard way. So imagine that you do make it in whichever organization you either get voted in or designated to lead. And you really feel like this is a recognition of your hard-working competence. People seem to respect you more. You get access to all kinds of perks you haven't had before. And people across the line seem to be on board with your vision. There are two ways this can go. First, the shorter one, things don't go as planned. Some accident happens, your vision just isn't appreciated or just doesn't work out. This happened to me on a governmental project I worked on and which was shut down right before launch after all the hard work and energy had been put in. And for me, as someone who imagined their whole life in public policy, this felt like a catastrophe because I realized that any of the projects I was going to work on from that point on was one step away from being stopped by a shift in the public mood, by a cabinet reshuffle, or by a random rivalry further up the decision chain. But what if things do go well? In 2019 and 2020, I had the chance to lead the Romanian Student Union in the UK, which is when Brexit happened. And that gave me a lot of exposure to people in government, in the private sector, in the media. I was lucky enough to even talk on TV several times about the impact of Brexit on our community. And I loved it. My social media was never as cool. But a few months later, I finished my term and moved into a grad job. And I could see my successor have all that validation and perks while I was in an extremely stressful job, extremely demanding job, which felt like a demotion. And that might seem strange to some of you, but it's what leadership can do to your ego. Well, it's probably naive to think that the most ambitious of us won't actively seek the top job. But it's probably less naive to think that we can convince them that there's a million things they can do once their term reaches its end. So I thought of a few tricks that you can try to strengthen that muscle that I was just talking about. The kind of thrill that one gets in positions of responsibility is very hard to replicate. So here are the tricks you can try and see if they work for you. First, limit your expectations of reaching the top. If you do make it, set some conditions for what it would take for you to stay in. Not able to deliver X by Y date, maybe it's time to step down. Think of an ideal term in office, and even if things do go well, try and stick to it. Foster the leaders around you. And this is an overused phrase, but some people take this to mean that they can just choose a hand-picked successor to take under their wing and expect that they will continue their vision. But I would encourage you to look at the people who don't agree with you instead. Because if you can convince them that your vision is the right one, then you know it is. And if they don't, and if things don't go well, your organization will thrive through the opposition. This is another instinct, silencing them and encouraging compliance. But if at the end of the day, every decision you make is met with applause, you're doing something wrong. Finally, but most importantly, nurture passions outside of your career. Letting go of your post or position or office is so much easier when you know you have other things to go back to once your term reaches its end. I think the reason leadership is so appealing is because it gives us a sense of meaning, of purpose. We feel like our work and life matter. But there's meaning in life to be found for ambitious people outside of leadership. You can find it in the million of passions that are waiting to be discovered, in music, art, sports, travel. Do these things for the journey, for the pleasure of the act itself, instead of the expectation that you'll somehow be top of that field. And remember that the truth, one way or another, sooner or later, will come out. People will remember what you've done. If you do your work well, people will remember it. If things don't quite go to plan, but you've tried your best and let others have their turn, people will remember that too. Because time will give them perspective, and how you've handled your succession might be the most important thing you do. If bit by bit we can work to rethink the way our generation, the next cohort of leaders, conceives their career progression, we can change and possibly reduce some of the conflicts and power struggles that we see on the public arena every day, and which trouble leadership. And we can hopefully bridge the gap that octopuses never could in their evolution, and maybe just transform the legend of Cincinnatus into the norm. Thank you very much.